Good evening, everybody. Good evening and welcome back. I hope you enjoyed your dinner. My name is Barbara Weinstein, and I am the Associate Director at the Religious Action Center. $20 years ago, the musical Rent opened on Broadway. And Rent's anthem, Seasons of Love, that we were just listening to, asks the question, how do you measure a year? The characters reply that among the many ways you can measure a year, you can do it in 525,600 minutes, in daylights, in sunsets, in midnights, in cups of coffee. We'll sing later. One of the show's many fans is Rabbi Michael Namath. And for the past 15 years, Michael has been the RAC's extraordinary program director. For years, if you happen to pass by Michael's office, chances are you'd have heard the Rent soundtrack coming out of his computer speakers. And tonight, we honor Michael on the occasion of the 100 Litaken teen social justice seminars that he has so brilliantly led for the past decade and a half. We thought it would be appropriate to try and at least approximate the immeasurable impact that Michael has had on the Litaken participants who have been impacted by the program he's run, by the rabbis who are lucky enough to call Michael a colleague, by the Machon Kaplan summer interns and the Eisendrath legislative assistants that he has mentored, and by all of us on the RAC staff that are lucky enough to get to work with him day in and day out. So in the spirit of Rent, how do you measure 100 Litakens? If my math is right, it's about 220,000 teenage participants, 45,000 lobby visits to Capitol Hill, and most importantly, perhaps, 500,000 slices of pizza served.
I'm Rabbi Barry Lutz from Temple Ahavat Shalom in Northridge, California. I kind of want to watch that instead of... No, I can't see what you're all seeing. During the Torah service every Shabbat morning at Litaken, Rabbi Namath calls up chaperones, rabbis, cantors, and youth workers to lead the Torah blessings for an aliyah. He then takes the opportunity at the end of that aliyah to offer each of us his blessings for our leadership in the sacred work of pursuing justice. I have been so blessed by Michael, and so it is now a profound honor for me to be able to briefly offer you, Michael, my blessing for leading us in the pursuit of justice over more than 100 Litaken seminars. As Barbara just said, somewhere in the neighborhood of 220,000? 220,000 teenagers have participated in Litaken under your visionary leadership. That alone should secure you a place in Olam Haba, at God's right hand. But while the numbers are duly impressive, it is not the quantitative, but the qualitative It is not the quantitative, but the qualitative that distinguishes Michael. Rabbi Namath exemplifies the words of the prophet Micah. And what does Adonai require of you? To do justice, to love goodness, and to walk humbly with your God. Michael pursues justice, loves goodness, and indeed walks very humbly with God. More than that, Michael provides each of us the opportunity to do just the same. Over 12 years, I have brought close to 300 of my own teens from Northridge to Washington, D.C., and every one of them, Michael, has been transformed by the experience that you provided with your amazing RAC team. I would dare say a generation of teens in our movement have entered adulthood with a deeper commitment to social justice because of the sacred work that you do. I know Rabbi Namath to be a gracious, compassionate, and patient, oh my gosh, how patient, leader. It's not timed. Over 100 times, he has explained kesef, koach, and politica. And if you don't know what that is, you'll just have to ask him later. Over 100 times, he has guided rabbis, cantors, educators, and youth workers through the dizzying topic selection and lobbying process. And Michael, I have watched you do that each and every time as you treat each person, regardless of the circumstance, as one created in God's image, B'Tselem Elohim. You approach each person and each situation with grace, with humility, and with dignity. After 100 weekends, perhaps one could understand if Michael had declared this model of success and said, Gamarti, I'm done, I'm finished. But no, with the help and support of the RAC team, he continues to tweak, to refine, and adjust so that each year L'Takein is a bit different and always, always a little bit better. He is continually trying to squeeze out just a bit more meaning, just a little bit more Torah. And finally, Michael, I would be remiss if I did not take the opportunity to offer my own personal thanks to you for the blessings you have shared with me. I joined the Brickner Social Justice Fellowship because of L'Takein. And as a participant in that fellowship, without 350 adolescents swirling about, I have learned even more about you and from you. I have had the opportunity to come to know firsthand your deep knowledge, your serious thinking, and the careful consideration you put into every program that you do for all of us. I know I speak for so many of us that are here in this room and those who are not when I say that you are a rabbi's rabbi. And so, Michael, allow me to offer you the blessing you offer to us, each L'Takein. Mishaberach Avotenu ve'imotenu hu yivarech Rabbeinu. May the one who blessed our ancestors bless our rabbi, our teacher, Rabbi Michael Namath. May you continue to lead us on the path of justice and mercy. May we continue to be blessed and inspired by your model as our rabbi, that we might all learn to pursue justice, to do good, and to walk humbly before our God. Ad mea ve'esrim and beyond, to 120 and beyond. Mazel tov.
Hi, I'm Michaela Hellman-Tincher from Congregation Beth Am in Northern California, but I'm also a 16-year student of Michael Namath. If you've been to one of those 100 L'Takeins that we're celebrating tonight, and I have, first as a participant, then as a staff assistant, and finally as a legislative assistant for the RAC, You probably know the basics of what happens. Michael guides the RAC staff in developing thoughtful, meaningful programming that brings hot-button DC issues to hundreds of teens and teaches savvy advocacy skills to high schoolers. You might even know that Michael routinely tells a story at these letakens about going upstream. He uses the story to teach participants that policy and advocacy matter in getting to the root of the injustices that we see around us. But there are a couple things you may not know about what happens. You might not know that every single night of letaken, after the participants have gone to bed at 10 or 11 o'clock at night, a still energetic Michael leads the staff in brainstorming, even though he's done this dozens, and now we can say 100 times, new ways to make letaken even better for the next day and for the months ahead. You might also not know that even when the letaken season, which is exhausting and all-encompassing, is over, Michael's still running around at late hours, teaching Kutz Camp participants how to write their local legislators, or staying up late with the nifty social action vice presidents handing out toiletries to homeless residents of DC, or helping Mahone Kaplan participants fill up their Tupperwares with food to bring back to their empty dorm room. I was a beneficiary of all of those experiences. But you might know, because I know now that there are over 200,000 of us, what it feels like to learn from Michael. I've been learning from him for 15 years, or 16 years, as I said, and to learn from him is to feel the Jewish teachings of social justice come to life. Learning from Michael is not like learning from a cynical Washingtonian. Learning from Michael gives you hope and optimism about what you can achieve. Michael teaches all of his students, including me, that we can heal the world if only we have the patience, a theme, and the advocacy tools to do so. Thank you, Michael, for your years of teaching and mentorship. You've taught thousands of us to go upstream, and the world is better for it.
On behalf of the RAC staff, I can tell you that there is no greater pleasure than getting to work every day with Michael, and in so doing, being part of his family, along with his actual family, who are here today, his mom, Beverly, his wife, Rabbi Susan Shankman, Isabel, Jacob, and Evie. We have had the pleasure of welcoming them into our RAC home every day, and they are just as beloved together as Michael is to have on part of our team. And at the risk of mixing my musical metaphors, it is fair to say that if Michael's favorite musical is Rent, High School Musical is a close second, and he is our very own Troy Bolton. No one more embodies the notion that we're all in this together. Every day, Michael teaches us just as he teaches the participants in the 100 Litaken seminars that he has led. And so, Michael, come on up. On behalf of all of us in this room, the RAC staff, and the thousands of Litaken students that you have taught over the years, it is our pleasure to present you with this yad that will be used at our Torah services at Litaken and beyond, that is inscribed with Michael's name and says the words, HaMoreh HaAhuv, our beloved teacher. Mazel tov. Have a yad.
Thank you to all of you. Thank you to the three of you for all of your beautiful words. I'm very fortunate and thankful that, as you heard, my mom is here. She believed every word of it. She now also has material to use for the next several months forward. In the spring of 2001, I found myself in the basement of the old RAC building, the same building, but it's completely different space. And I was there interviewing for this position with Mark Palavin. And we're having a great conversation. typical interview questions. And then all of a sudden, this energy, this ball of energy came into the room, started asking questions a little frenetically, and then David Saperstein left the room. And I was incredibly fortunate. Here I was coming right out of HUC, and David and Mark decided to take a chance. And as Mark Plavin would always say, you need to get the right people on the bus. And they said at that time, we think that guy's the right person to get on the bus. And I feel so blessed and honored that they took that chance, that they helped to mentor, to train, to support, and to help me to reach this moment where I am today. And I continue to receive that same support and mentorship from Rabbi Jonah Pesner, our new director. I'm also fortunate to have an incredible extended group of friends, my classmates from HUC, from both our year in Israel in 1996 and ordination in 2001. They are an incredible group of people who are always supportive, always there to help. Litaken chaperones, some of them soon to be Litaken chaperones, but I thank them as well. Running Litaken, very fortunate that I get a lot of the love and attention for it. But it's much like being the conductor of an orchestra, to continue the musical metaphors that I didn't know that we were going to be having this evening. I get to be up in front more often than not. But the orchestra does not happen if there is only a conductor. That is not possible. That's simply not how it works. And Litaken is the same. So in this room, there are Litaken chaperones. If you just want to wave a little bit so we can see how many of you are out there. There are Litaken participants, former Litaken participants. Probably not any Litaken participants right now. There are our staff assistants, our college students who help out during the weekends. Some of those here as well. There's the entire RAC staff team that's not physically at Litaken itself, but is doing so much of the work behind the scenes, whether it's the finances, the communications, the marketing, all of the other pieces. There are, of course, the people that are there that weekend. The legislative assistants are simply amazing, amazing people, and many of them are here. Many of them came just for tonight. There are, of course, our conference planners who make sure that everyone has somewhere to sleep, make sure that everyone has their dietary restrictions are followed. Since we are Jews, there are many dietary restrictions involved. There are formerly known as program associates, the forerunner to our assistant program director, now held by Shira Zemmel, those incredible people who have been thought partners with me, who've helped to train the legislative assistants, and all of the people who have been just so much a part of this work, that have been part of that orchestra that comes together to make the beautiful music that is our Litaken seminars. And finally, I'd like to thank my family, to Sue and Jacob and Evie and Isabel, who have allowed me to do this work. Their support, their love, sometimes even joining us for a little bit of Litaken, it means so much to me. And the other benefit is that working with all these high school students in a program that high school students actually like, it means that it has raised my esteem in my children's eyes quite a bit, that I'm doing something cool. So that has been a nice benefit as well. Thank you all so much. I appreciate this so greatly. This has been a wonderful evening. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Keep your seats. Our program will begin in just a moment.
Don't talk about our breasts. Get my glasses on. You know, let me see if that seat is not the light in my eyes. Because if it is,
I just had some water.
then because I've got to read.
Okay.
Oh my. It's okay. Oh God. Is this on? Jonah? Can everyone take their seats, please? Can we start, please? Steve Fox, sit down. Never get to say that to a rabbi. Before we start, my name is Liz Dunst. I'm chair of the Commission on Social Action. Before we start, and I have to read this because those of you who know me know when I say I'd like to ask all of you to do me a favor, when you hear the rest of this, you will know I couldn't possibly be the person who asked you. Everyone out there, take out your cell phones. Open your Facebook app. Well, are you doing it? Go to the RAC's Facebook page and share. I have no idea what I'm saying. And but I am a good soldier. And share the live streaming video of this conversation onto your own page. Are you all doing whatever the heck that was? Oh, I see Rabbi Jacobs is doing it. So if he's doing it and Jonah's doing it, in all seriousness, though, you know, tonight is really very important. This conversation on civil and human rights is an important one, not just for all of us who are in the room, but all of those people who aren't here. And so the live streaming of it to your extended networks, and we all have, even I have an extended network. I don't know how to live stream anything, but I do have, I'm Facebook. So this will help us sort of spread the word of really these sort of very pressing issues. So please do that as a favor to me, which is hysterical. I am really, really thrilled tonight to be able to share a conversation with Vanita Gupta. She is a highly accomplished civil rights litigator and advocate, and she's going to begin, although I'm sure she's already working knowing her, but she is going to begin as the president and the CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. An exceptionally important role. She's taking over from Wade Henderson, which all of you know because he has been a real partner of the RAC for many years. When Kivi Kaplan donated the RAC building, it was under a number of conditions, but one of them was that it be a hub for social justice organizations. And one of those organizations always was and always will be the Leadership Conference. Now, Vanita is not a stranger to many of us, and if you don't know her by sight, then you know her work. She was for many years at the ACLU as the Deputy Legal Director and Director of the Center for Justice, and so she oversaw the ACLU's work on criminal justice reform. She most recently served as the Principal Deputy Assistant Attorney General and Acting Head of the Civil Rights Division at the Department of Justice from October 2014, and isn't it surprising, until January of 2017. She led DOJ's work in a lot of the areas that we really care a great deal about. And the access to the ballot box, what are we going to do after Shelby versus Holder? And we'll talk more about that in the evening. But you know, Martin Luther King said that the difference between a dreamer, you remember this, and a visionary is that a dreamer has their eyes closed and a visionary has her eyes open. Vanita clearly has her eyes open. Her eyes are on the ball about what we're going to do. And this is really exemplified by her words at the commencement address of her and my alma mater, NYU Law School, where she said, "In America, we use the law and we turn to lawyers to translate values and ideals, among them equality, fairness, freedom, and opportunity, into real protection for all people in the country. The beauty of America's story and the prominence of America's legal framework is that we as a country and as a people can change. We can evolve imperfectly yet unyieldingly, is that we individuals stand up and speak out to ensure that our legal system brings our nation closer to our most cherished ideals." Helping bring about this kind of positive change is why you are all here. And so we are delighted to learn from you. And I will also say a moment of personal privilege. As an older member, one of the things Jonah didn't ask was, well, how many people here have been to many, many consultations and are over a certain age? And a lot of us would have stood up. But we're not ready to go out to the farm yet. But we are ready to make room for and learn from younger leaders like you. And I am so thrilled that you're going to be leading the Leadership Conference and leading all of us and teaching us tonight. So please welcome. So the first thing that I want to ask is really what your journey was to come to civil rights work, and particularly because I know your views about the fact that economic and social issues are also very important, but you chose to do your social justice work as a lawyer. And so what got you to social justice and civil rights, and what got you to decide it's a lawyer role that you wanted to have?
Sure. Well, let me just start by saying I am so grateful to be here this evening. And it felt a little bit like kismet because the first day that I was at the leadership conference meeting the staff when Wade Henderson and the board announced me to the staff, the first person I ran into was Rabbi Pessner. Literally, I think almost ran into Rabbi Pessner. And he asked me and told me about this consultation, and I was really touched and feel very blessed to be here this evening. And it is so amazing that I hear that this year's consultation is over twice the size as last year's. So thank you for your energy and for your motivation and your activism and your commitment, because we need it now more than ever. So I just feel really honored to be here. So I don't have a linear path to the law. When I was 4 years old, my family moved to Britain at a time when there was a rise of the skinhead movement. And I tell this story a little bit because to me it was one of the most formative experiences of my life. It's certainly one of my earliest childhood memories. But we had gone to the airport to pick up my grandmother, who was visiting for the first time from India, and stopped at a McDonald's on the way home. And we were sitting at this McDonald's, and a group of skinheads was sitting at the table next to us and started throwing French fries at us and yelled at us, "Go home, Pockies," which in Britain is a very derogatory term for people from the Asian subcontinent. I remember feeling terrified and scared and leaving with my mother and my sister and my grandmother. And kind of thereafter, always kept entering a room and seeing and it wasn't even intentional, but looking at the composition, the racial composition of a room and who was in and was I going to feel comfortable and just having kind of a very young racial consciousness at that point. And as I grew up, my parents were people who wanted us to be very engaged, and I ended up having a sister who came out as lesbian in high school, and it created its own trauma for my family. That my parents had an arranged marriage in India, not particularly conservative, but it was fairly kind of jarring. And all of this was very personal, and yet also felt really political to me in a way, in terms of small p, like a social justice thing that I wanted to struggle in my personal life, but also kind of out in the world to fight for people's rights. And in college and after that, I was very supported and did finally land up doing a lot of criminal justice work. And I will tell you that anyone who goes into any courtroom in any part of this country and spends more than one day in that courtroom will feel like they need to do something about what's happening in our criminal justice system. I don't believe you have to be a lawyer to make change. I think there are a lot of amazing people who are not lawyers who are doing incredible work to push the boundaries to make sure that our country lives up to its ideals now. But for me, that path was to be a lawyer. And I have every day been a happy lawyer, which I think is fairly unusual in this world.
Oh, yeah.
I really have. And, it's not because I haven't had my losses and my struggles. I have them every day. But it's because I have this incredible feeling of gratification that in the struggle itself. And the issues have changed. The times are different, obviously. But I have never looked back from that choice. And it's just been a privilege to be able to do what I can to make the country live up to its ideals.
And in the Justice Department, you have handled some of the most important cases. Can you talk a little bit about, one, I'm always been fascinated, even though I was in the government for 20 years, how the Justice Department decides, because we're going to be facing a different Justice Department, which I'll ask you about at the end. But how did your Justice Department decide which cases to take, where you were going to put priorities, because you did voting rights, you did the police brutality issues, obviously, voting rights, civil rights, transgender, all those are key issues. So I'm teeing them all up for you.
Yeah.
And
so I came into the Justice Department in October of 2014, and that was just weeks after Michael Brown had been killed in Ferguson, Missouri, and probably about a week after the Justice Department had announced that they were opening a pattern and practice investigation into the Ferguson Police Department. And obviously, I had come from the ACLU. It was my first time in government. I will say to President Obama and Attorney General Holder's credit, they believed that a civil rights lawyer should be at the head of the Civil Rights Division and installed me, even though I didn't have government experience. And no, it was a risk in a certain way.
Right.
But I came in very acutely aware of the level of tension around the country, around police and racial justice issues, and communities of color in particular. It had been work that I had done before, but it really did feel like what was happening in Ferguson was a tipping point of sorts for the country. And policing and criminal justice reform just ended up being very central to my time, to the 2.5 years, just under 2.5 years that I spent from Ferguson to Baltimore to Chicago. I will ask any one of you, because I'm very proud of this report, and it's not because I wrote it, it's because of the amazing career civil servants that did an extraordinary job doing that investigation. Pick up the Ferguson report that we wrote and just read about it to understand just how kind of bruising the relation, and how corrosive over time the relationship had become between the Ferguson Police Department and African American residents in particular, long before Michael Brown had been killed. That is why you saw that kind of simmering anger and resentment play up out into the street, was because for years their police department and their city had been levying and using themselves to levy fines and fees on people of color. Everything from $527 for growing high weeds and grass on your lawn to $400 and some for jaywalking and everything else. And And it was, policing just ended up being a very important part of our work. In a lot of ways, we were just revealing for the rest of the country what was happening in places like Baltimore and Chicago, because communities that live there have long been advocates for reform. But what the Justice Department was able to do was lift up those stories. So there's policing, there's criminal justice reform. I think President Obama and Attorney General Holder felt fairly liberated towards the last couple of years of their time, and there was a real bipartisan momentum, largely built up from the states. I bet you many of you, I'm sure, we can credit for working hard on these issues long before they were popular. But we had momentum to address issues of solitary confinement, issues of the over-incarceration of the mentally ill in our nation's jails, the problems of substance use disorder, and the over-reliance on a criminalization model that has resulted for a time in us having 5% of the world's population and 25% of the world's prison population. And so there was a lot of momentum there. Then we were on the forward-moving momentum on LGBT rights. I came in after the Justice Department had changed its litigating position in favor of supporting gay marriage, and it was, the Obergefell decision came down. I remember there was cheering in the halls of the Justice Department. But we knew immediately that there would be a push for a passage of anti-discrimination laws in states around the country as a result, in some way, part of a backlash. And we needed to gear up and make sure that we were following those developments. And so some of that was defensive, some of it was affirmative. And then we had voting rights. And the state of voting rights in this country is deplorable when you think, and the Justice Department had just the year before lost, and you referred to this, a very powerful tool to protect voting rights around the country, and it was a tool that they lost in Shelby County, and it was a very significant part of the work that we did, that every time a jurisdiction changed some kind of process or procedure in voting, it would need to be cleared. If they were from a jurisdiction that had a history of racial discrimination, it would need to be cleared by the Justice Department to ensure that there wasn't ill motive in that change, and we lost that. And we needed to use every other tool that we had at our disposal to protect people's voting rights. And it took a lot of creativity. It took a lot of knowledge from the field, from activists who were telling us about changes that they were seeing locally, because it became a lot harder for us to detect those changes. And the reliance on advocates and private attorneys general, as I call them, to help us do that work was important. And I'll just, there's other things I will say on the transgender issue, because I am so in awe of what, in many ways, you all have been a vanguard on that issue, and I'm deeply distressed by the undoing of some of that work. I know we're going to talk about that. But it was really important for us to protect all children in our nation's public schools and in our nation's schools. And just the kind of sheer indignity of what was happening in some communities, I think, for transgender students was really troubling. And to me, it was just a basic human rights issue that children should be able to go to the bathroom of their gender, according to their gender identity. I don't think most of us could have foreseen the huge brouhaha that ensued after that over what we perceive to be a kind of a human right for transgender students, and certainly in alignment with our civil rights laws, but there you have it. I want to give one shout out, because I worked in the Justice Department with amazing, amazing people. And one of them was Rabbi Jacobs' amazing son, David Jacobs, who you have to tell him that I gave him this shout out, but he was one of our folks in the Office of Public Affairs who really helped us get the word out about what it was that we were doing. We were not seeking to tinker at the edges of the Civil Rights Division. Our job is to aggressively enforce our nation's civil rights laws. That's why the division exists, and I was really proud of what we were able to get done in those 2.5 years. I know I'm giving long. I'm going to make my answer shorter, but there's one.
Don't make your answer short. They don't want to hear from me. They want to hear from you.
There's one major issue that I think really came to light the final year of my time there. And that was the issue of religious discrimination, and in particular, our hate crimes enforcement work. As the nation's chief civil rights law enforcement officer, it was really painful to see such an uptick in allegations of hate violence around the country during a very divisive election, an election where the rhetoric by some sought to normalize and legitimize hate Obviously, we saw an uptick in Islamophobia. We were seeing it in bullying in the schools. We were seeing it in acts of violence as well. But I would say even across the board, because as any of us know, and those of us who feel affiliated with religious communities, an attack on one is an attack on all of us. And so that work has been incredibly important, but also quite painful.
You said something in one of your answers which always mystifies non-lawyers and even lawyers, which is, well, the Justice Department changed its position and now we were going to be doing X or Y or Z, which for many people one would have thought, well, it's the position of the law, as opposed to the interpretations. Can you talk a little bit about maybe what you see in the future, but also, now the Justice Department is looking at the consent decrees, which one would have thought is settled law or settled process, but everything's up for grabs. Could you talk a bit?
Yeah, so the decision to change the litigating position of the Justice Department was a long and very deliberate one. So these are not decisions that were made kind of knee-jerk. It was about the evolution of the law. There were a number of states that had evolved to uphold gay marriage in the course of the conversation that was happening. I mean, if you look at the LGBT rights movement in so many ways in the last 15 years, and it's just been kind of breathtaking to see the level of change, both not only kind of in the legal landscape, but I think almost more importantly in the hearts and minds and in our culture in this country. And we still have a lot of work to do, but it's a movement that gives me a lot of inspiration. But it was a long conversation involving many, many people before my time at the Justice Department around this issue. And ultimately, the president, after getting a recommendation from the Justice Department, agreed and signed off on this. And it was, I think, really a culmination of the kind of trajectory of the movement. Every Justice Department has political appointees. That's how the Justice Department is run. But there are career civil servants that are making and should be making core decisions about enforcement activities. And so when career civil servants and career lawyers in the Justice Department recommended change in the litigating position, that was also very important for the politicals in the building. I think what has been disheartening about some of the recent activity is, within days there was the undoing and the withdrawal of the transgender guidance. I would say, from our perspective, pretty predictable, given who was at the helm of the Justice Department and kind of comments that had been made during the election season. But the consent decrees are it's odd because it's actually, there are only 15 consent decrees in police departments around the country. You would think the way that they have been attacked, that there are so many more. There are somewhere between 16,000 and 18,000 police departments in this country. And the Justice Department has consent decrees in 15. Those are 15 jurisdictions where the relationships between law enforcement and the communities that they serve were so profoundly eroded, where there's such a long-standing history of systemic abuses. And, mind you, Congress gave the Justice Department the jurisdiction to investigate police departments in the aftermath of the Rodney King beating. So this weekend we're 25 years commemorating what happened in Los Angeles. And Congress enacted the law that gave the Justice Department that jurisdiction. It would be an abdication of the Justice Department's responsibility not investigate police departments where there is allegations of systemic abuses and to not remedy them through an effective mechanism. And so what happened in Baltimore, where we had negotiated a consent decree and filed it right before the inauguration, and to have the new administration seek to delay it and really to undo it, I think was really disheartening. But I will say that this is where the courts are a vital institution right now. They're always vital, but they are as vital as ever. And the federal judge said no. This thing has been filed. There's ample evidence. You can look at our 200-plus page report on the Baltimore Police Department. And it's why it is so important that we have an independent judiciary. We have to do everything we can. It's an issue that is not particularly sexy and doesn't get talked about enough in the social justice communities and in civil rights communities, but an independent judiciary is absolutely essential to maintaining our civil rights and our constitutional rights in this country.
Talk a little more. Thank you. Talk a little bit more about how we go about doing that. Absolutely agree. But how can we go about the issues of supporting an independent judiciary?
Well, I mean, I know the Religious Action Center actually does take position on nominations, and sometimes, there are organizations that can't do that for different reasons. They're in and out of court all the time, like the ACLU does not take positions on nominations. But I will say the Leadership Conference does. I think it's important for the institutions that do it to be engaged and for there to be support for that activity. It's important to have vetting, for folks to be knowledgeable about what's happening in the judicial nominations process, about who is being put up and what the issues are, what they stand for, how they've upheld the law, and where they come out. And that kind of engagement with organizations that do judicial nominations work and that do take positions. And right now, there is the highest number of vacancies at this administration. It's something, the statistic is that President Trump has an opportunity to fill more judgeships than any prior president in the last several decades. And so we need to be educated. It's not just about the Supreme Court. It's just like it's not just about the presidential election. We can't care about the rule of law and what leads up just for the highest judgeship. We need to be engaged about what's happening in the intermediate federal courts and in the district courts. And so, it's important then to know what the Religious Action Center is putting out there and what vetting and information they've put out, what the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights is saying about judges, and for senators and folks in Congress to hear from you all about what your thoughts are and whether you believe that this judge is going to uphold the Constitution and the rule of law. That is essential. It is a very important part that, again, as I said, I don't think gets talked about enough, but there is room for all of us to get engaged in that process.
And so on the issue, for the last 8 years, at least, we have had what I would describe as friends in the Justice Department. We knew that the Justice Department had the approach that you have talked about. I don't know whether we have friends in the Justice Department now. Again, it's another question about what we can do to make sure that the issues that we care about, there is enforcement on civil rights issues. How do we go about pressuring, or whatever word we want to use, this Justice Department? We have career people, obviously, but we also have political appointees. How do we maneuver? Because we're trying, all of us, to find our way in really a new world where we don't have a Justice Department, I don't think, a Justice Department that really has the same enforcement zeal on some of the issues that we really care about.
Well, when I was at the Justice Department, we met with a lot of groups, and you have to ask for those meetings. And I think it's important to be prepared and strategic if you do those meetings. But look, on things like religious discrimination and hate crimes and so many other issues, LGBT rights and the like, I think it would be important for folks in this room to think about, is there a small delegation where we want to ask for a meeting and sit down and talk to the folks running the Civil Rights Division about some of these issues that are top of mind. One of the things also that I think has been, even in this time where I think it's been very troubling for those of us who care deeply about civil rights, one of the things that has been so inspiring to me is that just, the day after the travel ban and the Muslim travel ban, and folks were at the airport and they were on the street and the media was, covering this with full zeal. It wasn't just Muslims out there at the airports and our Muslim American friends in the streets. It was so many of us and people showing solidarity and saying, this is not the country we are. This is not who we stand for. We are not going to stand for it. And that kind of thing where there's solidarity. So I would say, yes, ask for those meetings, but also reach out in solidarity and to other groups. This is what the Leadership Conference exists to do. I hope that I will be able to do it with all of you and with your leaders around, figuring out what the strategy is and how do we perform the watchdog function, but also make sure that the very key issues, the Justice Department touches every issue of life, and it's really important. That said, so many of the issues that we work on are about local issues, right? And we have to remember right now that while there's a fight to make sure that the federal government lives up to its obligation, there's so much requirement for leadership locally in your communities around the country on criminal justice, on LGBT rights, on immigrants' rights, and making sure that immigrant families are not living in fear 24 hours a day. And so, to me, there's kind of a dual strategy of making sure that we're working in our communities locally, but then also working with your leaders to make sure that there's a strategy in Washington, D.C. that ensures that we're living up to the promise of America and to what we all believe this country stands for.
We didn't put her up to this. But what Vanita just articulated is really the strategy we've been talking about, which is a local strategy where all of the congregations get involved in where they can have effect on the local level, and at the same time feed that into
That's right.
the federal
When
legislation.
you think about what folks on the Hill respond to, they respond to mobilization that's happening because local communities are activated and they need to hear from you. But the work to organize and to mobilize isn't some ethereal thing that we can do from Washington, D.C. That is in every community in which all of us live. It's our communities, and that's where you build power. That's where you actually kind of coalesce around particular issues and campaigns. But all of that then has a role, if organized and done effectively, to push federally as well. And so, a lot of policy is made locally and at the state level, but a lot of it is important to be leveraged for the federal fights.
I forgot to ask you something that has been bothering me, so I'm on the stage, I can ask the question. And that is this, I would guess we call it the dichotomy that people see between religious rights and civil rights. And RFRA, and how do we maneuver that issue? Because I'm not sure there is a dichotomy, but I'd like to hear.
Yeah, look, it's a really hard question. I'm not sure. I don't think there usually is a dichotomy. I think that what worries me is that there are people in this country that want to create that dichotomy and to build that wedge between religious freedom and civil rights. And over and over again, and we know this, and we know it from the history of the Religious Action Center about how important religious and faith communities have been in the fight for civil rights. And so, I think on RFRA, the courts are obviously very engaged in this. But I think we have to push back on this notion that we prioritize rights in this country. And it cannot be that people are able to discriminate against vulnerable communities in the name of religion. There's an accommodation that can happen, and I think the courts are trying to figure it out, and we are trying to figure it out. But I would urge a pushback on this frame that somehow it's one versus the other, because then the kind of mystical they or the nameless they, I think, win. And our history is just the length of our history has always showed that religious faith groups have always been, one of the major pushers for civil rights advancement.
I want to ask you about the leadership conference, but I want to ask you first, what do you see as the three big risks or fears? Not that you have any fear, but
No, I do.
yeah, I know, we all do. We all do, but we're going to stick it out. Of what's coming. What do you see coming out of the Justice Department that we should be particularly careful at looking at and paying attention to? Because, sometimes it's like a fire hydrant. So many things are coming out at you that you don't know, and you don't want to say, I'm only going to do X or Y. So tell us what you think we should be particularly looking at and particularly watching.
So, I think It's always important to be vigilant. I think our civil rights history has proven that vigilance is, you can't ever kind of completely declare victory. You have to be vigilant. But, you know, there are certain buckets of issues that I think are really important right now. And it's not just watching the Justice Department, obviously. It's kind of watching all the agencies and the cabinet in Washington, but as I said, also where are there opportunities state and locally to make a difference where there might not be in Washington. And I would say policing and criminal justice reform. We have had a 40-year experiment with mass incarceration that has been devastating to communities of color that have not made us safer, have resulted in communities spending a lot of money building prisons rather than on education and the like. And I think there's been a real turn of the tide in the last few years, something that was unimaginable to me, quite honestly, just even 10 years ago. And I am worried that Washington, D.C. now is setting a different tone and tenor on that. There's LGBT rights and making sure that transgender students and are protected, and that states that enact anti-discrimination laws, that there's a strategy to fight back. Voting rights. We've got to do everything we can to protect voting rights. And again, there's a lot of work that is done from private advocacy groups. There's a lot of work that we need to know about the changes, the very subtle local changes that happen in voting around the country, and being able to funnel that information to groups that are at the forefront of that is really important. Religious discrimination is very key, and the ability to have interfaith coalitions that are speaking out against religious discrimination and standing up for common values, I think, is vital right now. And we are seeing, a major assault on these issues. And immigration, I think that we haven't begun to see what is going to happen yet on immigration. And, and a lot of these issues, I will say, are very balled up in each other. But again, I think this is a time of unprecedented solidarity. There are people coming together, and this, sometimes crisis has a way of doing that. Crisis has a way of bringing folks together to push hard on issues and to recognize where there's commonality. The history of this country has never been one of linear progress. It never has. We are often in positions, and if you look at our history, where we go through years of significant progress followed by retrenchment and backlash. And the progress that has been made, and we have come a long way from slavery, but we have a lot of work to do. The progress that has been made has not been inevitable. It was not that people could sit back and we could rely on kind of the institutions fixing this and remaining core to our values. The progress has happened because individuals like you, like all of you, that are here, that are engaged, that are motivated, that are going to go back to your communities and stand up for what is right and make a difference locally and strategize on what can happen federally. That's how this progress gets made. And it is through relentless persistence that we will win.
Questions? Oh, okay. You can all see why I'm very comfortable deciding, instead of playing golf 1 day a week, I'm going to start playing golf 2 days a week and turn things over to you. So we're going.
I was wondering where that was going.
So we're going to have time for some questions and some answers. Am I supposed to be able to see anybody? Because I can't see a soul. So if people raising their hand, tell me what to do. There's a microphone over there. There are microphones, but there's no people at the microphones. Could you share who you are so we know?
David Cohen from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Was that for Cohen's or Wisconsin? I just have 2 words. Ninth Circuit. We've heard from the president that he's not a fan of those activist judges in the Ninth Circuit, and he's interested in, I guess, redistricting or somehow redrawing the map. Is this something that is likely to happen? What would it take for that to happen? How can it be prevented? I
will say it's highly unlikely that will happen, but I I will also say that I and many others in this country have been really disturbed by the attacks on the judiciary. And it is, I feel like it's a constitutional 101 class to understand how this country works, where there's the courts, there's the executive branch, and there's the legislative branch. And but to attack judges for decisions that they are making on the rule of law, based on the rule of law, you may disagree with the opinion. I disagree with judges' opinions on a regular basis. You'll be surprised to know. But to attack the judges and to be so personally attacking of them, I think is deeply troubling. And so, this is about litigating in court and should not be about an attack on the judiciary. And so
I think in order to change, there are lawyers who know more than I do here, but I think he has to go to Congress to change the Ninth Circuit. So he can bluster, but he can't do it. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Max Chaikin. I'm a fourth-year rabbinical student at HUC in Los Angeles. I'm wondering, you've spoken so eloquently about criminal justice reform, and as you've mentioned, that's such an intersectional issue with race and socioeconomic status and so many other things. I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about how the war on drugs and drug reform and drug policy fits into that for you.
It is a very core aspect of the work that people are doing on criminal justice reform. I came into this work, my first case out of law school, I was at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and I got involved in a case that was happening. It was called in a small town called Tulia, Texas, where the local authorities had arrested over 12% of the town's black adult male population in one overnight on July 23rd, 1999, and had called the TV cameras to place themselves outside of the sheriff's jail and paraded folks. They entered their homes with SWAT regalia and hauled folks out of bed at 3 and 4 in the morning. And I don't like how I look at 3 and 4 in the morning. And so they paraded them in front of the cameras and carried it all without, and the allegations were all for between 1 and 4 grams of powder cocaine sales that had taken place over the course of 18 months, allegedly, by an undercover narcotics officer by the name of Tom Coleman, who had no notes for what he did. He had no corroboration. There was no video. There was no money. There was no marked money. There was literally nothing. He said he had written notes about the transactions on his leg because he was so deep undercover that he didn't want anyone to find out that he was undercover, and then he took a shower, and that's why he didn't have notes. And I am not kidding that these individuals are 46 individuals who got arrested that day. And slowly they started to try, 40 of whom were African American, as I said, 3 were Hispanic and 3 were white. And they initially one after the other, tried to go to trial to prove their innocence, and got sentences of anywhere between 18 years and 361 years for stacked sentences of these very low-level cocaine offenses. And I got involved. I went to the Legal Defense Fund back in 2001 and started to investigate these cases and thought, God, in a town of 5,000 people, which is what Tulia was, you have 46 drug dealers? Like, is everyone on drugs in this town? I mean, it's kind of crazy. But it was at a time, 2001, remember, was this trajectory where the criminal justice system was just, the prison building was just in this upward trajectory. And Texas was far outspending on prison building than it was on higher education. Tom Coleman, and I know I used to tell the story really eloquently, it's been a while, but Tom Coleman won the Lawman of the Year award for the state of Texas. So don't think that this is just, this is a crazy Texas story. I mean, this guy was, Senator John Cornyn was then Attorney General and gave him the award. He turned out, when we started to dig, that he had been arrested for theft and abuse of official capacity while he was on the job as an undercover narcotics officer, and all of that had been suppressed by the prosecution. And then there were defense lawyers who were making their bread and butter off of the good graces of the judge, couldn't perform adversarial process. Many of them had no criminal background and were meeting their clients on the first days that they were taking the plea to a term of years because people were increasingly terrified by these sentences. And so I got involved, and I think, again, it was a time where people were not speaking. And I blame also civil rights groups. There were very few civil rights groups that were really prioritizing what was happening in our nation's prisons and jails at that time. And we got involved. I mobilized firms. I built a team, and we unraveled those cases. And 2 years later, Governor Rick Perry pardoned all of the Tulia clients. But I tell that story not to be a pat on the back, but really honestly because it felt like a Band-Aid. I mean, it was a huge victory. I was very close to my clients. These were families that had been destroyed from the sting. But it was against a backdrop of incredible growth in our nation's prisons. And the war on drugs and the way that we have dealt with substance use and substance use disorder and not having anything but a criminalization model, no public health model, I think has been very devastating. And what I think has been heartening recently to see states really rethink that and to be at the vanguard of thinking through what has been happening, and to use more of public health models and to think about policing and pre-arrest diversion. There's so much amazing stuff that's happening. And then you have Attorney General Jeff Sessions just a few weeks ago invoking Nancy Reagan's war on drugs and the just say no paradigm. And we all know how that worked out. And so it is, it's a little bit of cognitive dissonance right now where you have conservatives talking about criminal justice reform who recognize the waste, both human, financial, and everything else. And yet you have leaders right now that are trying to take us back to the 1980s, and we can't let that happen.
I'm Jane Wishner. I'm from Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I have two questions. One about the legal construct you were talking about in answer to Liz's question about the dichotomy between claims of religious liberty and civil rights. And I think not everyone here might understand kind of RFRA and Hobby Lobby and what that means, and maybe a little bit of context, because this is happening in state legislatures that are trying to adopt these religious exemptions to discrimination law, anti-discrimination laws. The second thing is, having living in Albuquerque, where there is one of those consent decrees, there are local coalitions, from the ACLU organized the one in Albuquerque, but will there be opportunities for congregations and communities that are under those consent decrees to be engaged locally, and will there be hearings and opportunities for engagement and activism?
Let me start with your second question first, because it's so there are the consent decrees that exist, like in Albuquerque, have been filed with a federal judge, and there's an independent monitor. So it's not the Justice Department that monitors, but it's an independent monitor that, and it's a team of folks that monitor the compliance with the consent decree. And there are pockets and ways for local communities to engage. And in fact, I would encourage you, if you're in a jurisdiction that has a consent decree, but I would say even outside of that, where you care about what's happening in policing in your community, to reach out to, so in the consent decree context, there are mechanisms, and make your voice known to the monitor and ask to have those meetings and find out, and the monitor reports are all public. The community knows and has access to everything. It's supposed to be a transparent process. And figure out a way to plug in and to ensure that even if Justice Department enforcement of those consent decrees, slips, is forced to slip a little bit, that local communities are engaged and active in making sure that there is ongoing compliance and that the monitor understands that there is local accountability as well. And so I think that that's really important. I would say on policing issues, though, generally, there are a lot of really outstanding chiefs out there that post-Ferguson have recognized that they don't want to wait for the next crisis in their community. And that if you, are organizing interracial, interreligious groups to meet with the chiefs, to talk about reform, to understand what's happening in your community, to ask for data, to understand what the policing priorities are, how can we make sure that we've got police community trust, that we can honor our law enforcement officers for doing the very difficult jobs that they do while also making sure civil rights are protected. There's places for local communities and local leadership to plug in, and it is vitally important. And so I will say that about that. On the religious freedom issue, you're right to maybe point out, and I'm happy to explain.
Go ahead.
I'll say, the way that this plays out is, for instance, and the religious, RFRA has been a very important statute in helping to ensure.
Religious Freedom Restoration Act, for those that
Thank you. The
aren't here.
acronyms, I should break those down. It's a very important statute seeking to ensure that there is religious freedom in this country. But in recent years, there have been increasingly voices, like local businesses, that have been seeking or have discriminated against, for example, LGBT couples in the name of religion, saying that it violates their religious beliefs to serve a person who is LGBT. And what is really seriously problematic is that people don't get to pick and choose which civil rights laws they get to enforce. And so being able, or to comply with, I will say, and so being able to, we're having a very robust discussion, though, about how this breaks down and how do you respect religious freedom while ensuring that that groups that are protected by our federal civil rights laws remain protected regardless of kind of private beliefs. And there's a long history, of course, of private beliefs being used to engage in discrimination, but it is a thorny bucket of issues. I don't have the perfect answer. I don't know. It's a difficult set of issues, but again, it cannot be that people's civil rights are able to be violated, or that we're prioritizing certain rights over others when there are laws of the land. So
we have time. He's telling me we don't, but I think we do. For just the two people who are at the mic.
It's good to have power, isn't it, Liz?
Well, only when I'm sitting in this chair.
My name's David Fishback. I live in Olney, Maryland. I have a question about the new HB2 in North Carolina. That legislation still prevents, for example, the city of Charlotte from enacting ordinances protecting LGBT people. Years ago, Justice Kennedy wrote a decision, Romer v. Evans, in which he reversed an attempt by the state of Colorado to prevent localities from enacting protections for LGBT people. I cannot for the life of me figure out why that doesn't make it a slam dunk argument against HB2 as to why, particularly with Justice Kennedy wrote the decision, we still have that 5-member majority on that issue, why that statute just on that basis would be a flat-out violation of Romer v. Evans.
So the ACLU apparently agrees with you. So the Justice Department they declared that the litigation was moot after they changed the law, so they are no longer involved in the litigation. But the ACLU is continuing to litigate that case. And I think it's going to be, I don't know what happened to all of the court dates, but they are advancing, in part, that theory around the ongoing discrimination inherent in the new HB2 law, and we'll see how it plays out in the courts.
Last question.
Thank
because
you.
He's going to kill me.
I'm Rabbi Nancy Kasten from Dallas, Texas, and first of all, I just want to say that that the Tulia case was also a great example of where faith-based organizing came into play, and the ACLU definitely was critical in turning over those convictions. But the woman who was part of the family that led the faith-based organizing is now the leader of faith-based organizing in our community and doing an amazing job. So.
Who is it? Is it
Lydia Bean?
Lydia Bean.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Every case I've ever worked on has involved incredible organizing on the ground, honestly.
Yeah. So we have to keep doing that, and it works. My question is, you had a really important list of things that we have to be concerned about. I was struck by the fact that reproductive rights was not on it.
Oh, it's on there. Sorry, that was just education's on there, reproductive rights is on there. There's no question.
I just wonder if reproductive rights, if we need to, if anyone is thinking about that in terms of being in another category of civil rights, and where is it going to fit? How are we going to advocate for reproductive rights and at this time, given all the obstacles?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you pointed out that was just a complete mind blip. And again, if I start to think about some core issues, I know the list is longer. Planned Parenthood and NARAL are all part of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. And it is, to me, this is fundamentally about women's right to choose and access to health. And it is really critically important that we recognize that we cannot allow an assault on the ability of women to make decisions about our health. And so I think that we are seeing, obviously, not just an assault on reproductive rights. We're seeing it on organizations that are engaged in providing women's health, and it's something that we absolutely need to be very engaged with and to be very vigilant on and to fight back on. No question.
So, I want you to join me in a second and thank Vanita for being here. I want to say, we at the RAC, they at the RAC, have always been, big proponents, members, active people in the Leadership Conference. We really look forward to your leadership of the conference. We will be with you every step of the way, as we have been before with Wade, and we certainly will be with you, and you're going to be a fabulous leader.
Thank you. And
Thank you all for
Thank you.